Americans for Prosperity is committed to breaking barriers across the country, and Americans for Prosperity is growing across North Dakota. By calling on lawmakers to reduce taxes, spend less, improve health care, and provide second chances, we can empower all North Dakotans to rise. We're fighting for you. Join us today so we can make North Dakota the best state to live, work, and raise a family. Americans for Prosperity paid for this ad. Dr. Shelley Lenz is a veterinarian. She practices in western North Dakota and also internationally, which is something we're going to talk about here in a moment. She also announced that she intends to seek her party's nomination to run for governor. So far, she is the only announced candidate for the Democrats. Republicans, of course, have incumbent Doug Burgum, and I'm not aware of anybody in Republican circles who's thinking about challenging him for that nomination. So right now it's Shelley Lenz versus Doug Burgum, pending other people getting into the race. And Dr. Shelley, as you refer to yourself, how you doing?
I'm doing good. How are you, Rob?
I'm pretty good. Tell us a little bit about yourself. You're from the Dickinson area. You're a veterinarian, but we got into all of that. But give us a bio. Who is Dr. Shelley Lenz?
So Dr. Shelley Lenz has a PhD in neuropharmacology and a DBM in veterinary medicine. And probably about 15, 16 years ago, I found that my real vocation is developing rural veterinary medicine throughout the nation and internationally. And through that development of veterinary medicine, I realized that, it took a while for me to realize this, that animal suffering and well-being will never be above the human condition or human well-being. And so a lot of my projects then moved to both nationally, locally, and internationally to elevating or focusing on sustainable economic development in underserved regions in the United States and around the globe.
How does that tie into? How does that? I mean, I think how does that tie in with being a veterinarian? I mean, because that seems like a big leap from sustainable economic development in rural areas to I'm a veterinarian doing this sort of work. How does that happen?
Yeah, well, for me being a veterinarian and realizing that that's what the work that needs to be done to be a good veterinarian or to be able to help the animals. So all animals are throughout the world are valuable for either a sustainable food source for food security or general companionship. And so you can do all you want. You can be the best vet in the world, but if the people on the animal. And so a lot of places I work in the world and also Western North Dakota, well, maybe not Western, but are landless people. And so one of the big things people need for their well-being is nutrition and food security. And so I focus a lot on that, and that comes from animal-sourced foods are the most nutritious and nutrient-dense foods available that works in conjunction with regenerative farming to kind of provide that local food security, which is a big thing here in North Dakota. Our cattle industry is huge, and I feel that we're getting beat up on the world stage and on the national level. And I think it's because people don't understand the value of cows in our grasslands here in North Dakota. And I would like to prioritize that during my run to elevate the importance of the cattle industry for environment and also for nutrient-dense food for the health of our people.
Well,
security.
I want to get into all of that, but tell me,
okay.
when we were scheduling our interview, you told me, I made the announcement, but now I got to go to Nicaragua for a project. What are you doing in Nicaragua? Because you've referred a lot to international stuff. What are you doing on the international stage?
Yeah, so I work in Nicaragua, Guatemala, Peru, Uganda. I've been asked to come to Pakistan. And what I do is I set up veterinary clinics and do local training for the veterinarians, but I also set up how to run businesses. So like on top of teaching the veterinarians how to do quality work, because that brings value to the producer or the animal owner, so they could pay the veterinarian, so the veterinarian will be locally available, but they also need to learn how to run a business. So I set up veterinary clinics, businesses with equipment. So I use a lot of, because I work all over the world, I use a lot of telemedicine after I've trained them. You know, I have to go and touch the project and see the subtle things, but then I talk with them daily over different cases, but they have the tools and to be my hands and eyes when I'm not there, and we use telemedicine to kind of continue their mentorship. But also what is a very, very important aspect is developing your veterinarian as a community leader, which they always end up being, no matter whether it's United States or Nicaragua or Uganda or Pakistan, you develop community businesses, which is often in the trades in these types of countries, and also in Western North Dakota, which is vocational training development, whether it's carpentry, masonry, farrier, ironwork, all that. And so sometimes I'm looking more building the human infrastructure, and I find those kind of natural leaders and natural workers, and I start to invest in them. And so most of my investments are smaller into the human infrastructure development.
So is this like a nonprofit group? Is this like a nonprofit group you founded, or one that you've worked for that you're doing all this through?
I'm sorry. Yeah, so I used to work with another group until I kept going back to these countries year after year after year, and it was the same problem. And that's when I finally realized, oh, wait, I have to elevate the human condition. So I opened my own nonprofit, a 501c3 international nonprofit, which is not easy to attain. Then I did that in 2013, I think. And so, yes, my own nonprofit. And so this model of addressing veterinary services and animal welfare by investing in the people and the local businesses and regenerative farming was such a unique way of starting to address animal issues throughout the world that it took a big, heavy lift. I work in pretty politically unstable areas, and it's part of that poverty cycle of food insecurity and lack of rule of law and stuff like that. And amazingly, the project was quite successful. And so then I've been invited to come to even worse regions of the world to see if we can help elevate the human condition in those areas. And actually, veterinary medicine, we do have an arm in the military, in the Army, is our military branch that we work in. And I've worked with military vets, and they are often always at the table at the peacekeeping talks. We're considered the peacekeepers. And so also my projects in the different countries, I will check in with the U.S. Embassy because they just want to know who's out there, and because we have our ears and eyes on the ground. We see local problems happening before the information might get up to the higher ups. Because again, I usually work in rural areas.
So let's shift gears. I mean, that's all fascinating, but let's bring it back to North Dakota now. Are you from North Dakota originally, or how did you end up in Dickinson?
So I was born and raised in Ohio. My grandfather, Alfred Murphy, was born and raised one of 12 kids on a ranch in Killdeer area. He left in the Depression. Everybody was starving.
Sure.
And so he hoboed to Ohio, and he ended up getting an electrical engineering degree there. Met my grandma, had my mom. My mom was an only child. My great-grandma was a pretty tough bird, and my great-grandma from North Dakota, and there was a lot of, bachelors or broken up relationships. So even though there were 12 children, there was just like 2 or 3 kind of inherited. Like my mom and my 2 uncles that inherited a lot of the land. Okay. And so mom came back out, and she used to spend her summers here. But when she came out and brought my dad is off the boat German. He came from Germany to come to the United States for graduate school. He's a nuclear engineer, but then he worked in the oil and gas And so when he came out here with my mom, he fell in love with it. And so they spent about half the year here and half the year back in Ohio. And as we started visiting, me and my 4 siblings would come out and visit. I fell in love with the Northern Plains, period. I just loved the exposure. And then over time, I also realized that this was a very underserved area. At the time, I realized that I was working as a horse vet in Kentucky on the thoroughbreds, so pretty in the elite group there. And, 50 other veterinarians wanted my job. And back in Kentucky, which was great, I had the best mentors, but I was also starting my international work and coming back out here in North Dakota, and I realized that my true vocation was, serving the underserved.
So when did you decide to move to North Dakota full time?
2007.
2007. Interesting. Okay.
Yep.
And you said in Dickinson area, or you're in Killdeer, or what?
I started in Killdeer, so this was before the boom. And again, I was looking to be a rural vet, and so I started in Killdeer because that's where my land is. And so I started there, and my practice grew really fast. And it was right during the boom, and so I opened a second clinic in Dickinson, and that exploded, and so I bought even more property, and I grew to one of the largest veterinary clinics, in North Dakota, or especially Western North Dakota, and we have now 4 veterinarians, 20 employees, and we serve not only our clients here, probably about 25, 30,000 clients, but also we serve as a referral hospital to the local veterinarians. We have like a CT machine, and we do orthopedic surgery. In North Dakota, we don't have specialty practices, and very similar to kind of difficult to access quality healthcare in the human world as well, in rural anywhere, but particularly rural North Dakota. So we try to provide all the services we can to our rural population and our veterinarians.
So let me move to Western North Dakota. That's all wonderful. And you realize why we have to ask all these questions. We're from North Dakota. North Dakotans like having that personal connection. I always joke with people that in North Dakota, if you're meeting somebody for the first time, you have to find in some way that you're connected to them in a personal way, right? So it's like
you can see their faces.
Yeah.
You're
from Ohio. I have a nephew out in Ohio, right? So you're from Ohio. I have a nephew out in Ohio. Now we're connected. Now we can be friends, right?
Yeah.
That's a very North Dakota Midwestern thing. I don't know why we do 100%. It, but we do it, and people want to understand. So, what made you want to run for governor?
So I was looking. So I'm in the phase. I'm 51 years old. I'm in the phase. I've grown a very successful business, and I'm in this phase of my next step in life to contribute more to my society. And I started looking for a political office to maybe run for. I was looking at mayor here because I like my city here in North Dakota or in Dickinson, but I happen to like my mayor, Scott Decker. He's pretty good. And so I started considering what candidate I could support and campaign for it and invest in. And someone suggested I couldn't find a candidate. And I'm an independent, so you said this is a small little mistake. I don't have a party. I'm an independent, and I always have been. But the Dem party, some people that I've been interacting with had said, "Well, have you ever considered governor?" And I do you know that kombucha girl meme when she drinks that kombucha and makes all those funny faces? And that's kind of the feeling I went
You're talking
through.
to the wrong person for memes. I'm
okay. I'm sorry.
Yeah,
okay,
I'm sorry. I'm an old curmudgeon, so I memes.
That's okay. I couldn't find the candidate that I was looking for, and I think you hit the nail on the head. In a recent blog I read of yours is like, the Democratic Party is recreating itself right now. It has to. I mean, how did we lose the farmers and the workers? I mean, that's what we are, and that's what I'm about. And so I decided to throw my hat in the ring. I'm in a position right now that I have somewhat passive income as just leading my practice, not doing as much clinical work, and I want to bring to the statewide conversation some of these issues that are affecting largely our smaller communities. I happen to live in Western North Dakota, and I think we're somehow underrepresented. And I also don't understand how we can have largely Republican everything, but we're still not getting our voice heard out here. And senator out here, Gardner.
Give me some examples of how the state government is not paying attention to Western North Dakota.
So an example would be, so our schools are busting. We need to build more schools because there were young families that came during the boom here, and it's not just the oil industry; it's all the small businesses that support that industry, and so there's a lot of young children that are coming in here, and so as we're projecting the size of classroom and building, and our buildings are older, we need a new school, and we just built one school, but we still need another one, and the way money comes out here is per pupil, and again, rural people, we don't have as many people, so that affects voting and also how much money comes back to like the schools. So they're going to raise the property taxes. Well, we're getting squeezed and squeezed and squeezed here as property owners, and you know how North Dakotans are about their property rights.
Yeah.
And so that's an example. And I think there's some pretty practical solutions to that I would like to, so Bergen's also focusing on vocational training because that's what we need to do. We have 30,000 open jobs that we can't fill. Our economy, great, but our quality of life and our workforce development is very poor. And I think we can really focus on local, state incentives and programs that can fix that relatively quickly without just a huge investment in just infrastructure, which we need to do.
Yeah.
But so, for an example, would be where I grew up in Ohio. When I went to high school, after your second year of high school, you can decide whether to go to vocational school or continue your traditional path. And so I am really surprised that here in North Dakota, we don't have a junior vocational school as a way to finish your high school education, and then you can hit the ground running with the amazing mentorship that's here right out of the box. That would be an example.
Let's go back, because I think it's really interesting what you said about Western North Dakota, because I think you're right. I think a lot of the needs of Western North Dakota are overlooked. I don't know that it's, and I just want to see if you agree with me or not, I don't know that it's a partisan issue so much as an east-west population issue. Because if you think about it,
100%.
There are law, regardless of party, parochialism. Partisanship is great for elections, but when the legislative session starts, parochialism is what reigns supreme. You will have the most conservative lawmaker you've ever met in your life suddenly fighting to keep some state facility open because it happens to be in his or her district. It's kind of amazing. I mean, and part of the problem is, you look at, there are legislative districts in Fargo that could be measured geographically in blocks, right? They're small because the population is so dense there. There are Western North Dakota legislative districts that are the size of Connecticut.
Yeah.
And you've got, and they have one senator and two representatives. That's extremely difficult. And so that divide, I think it makes it hard. There's just more lawmakers from Eastern North Dakota. There just are. And it's tough for them.
100%.
It's tough because
the
Westerners
have a little bit of balance of power from somebody out from the western side or the more rural areas to help. I think
you could argue that, but you've got to win over Eastern voters to make that happen. So I think my platform is basically a nonpartisan platform, but I think also those. So far, I need to still explore the eastern side more, of course, I'm going to be doing that over this next month. But most. Yeah.
Go ahead.
No, I'm sorry. I don't mean to interrupt.
I was going to say most any family wherever they live, they need to want to focus on, education for the children. I go from pre-K to 12, not just K to 12, because there's a lot happening in that little developing brain in the early ages. And I go with nutrient-dense food security, which is, that's a human problem. That's not even east-west or urban-rural.
So let's talk a little bit, because you said something interesting, that you don't have a party, that you're an independent, but you're running for a political party's nomination. You're running for the Democratic Party's nomination. So what is your, I think the usefulness of political parties, because I do think that they are useful, is that at some point we have to understand the governing philosophy of our leaders. And so if a candidate chooses to associate themselves with a certain political party, that party has a platform, that party has a history, the candidate is associating themselves with that, understanding that there's going to be some deviation in that on the details, but saying in the broad strokes, this is how I'm defined. I am a Democrat. You're running for the Democratic nomination, but saying you're not a Democrat, you're an independent. Is it fair? I mean, voters are, in my experience, voters don't take very kindly to that sort of thing. Like if they're going to say, if you're an independent, then run as an independent.
Right. So that is a very good question, and I was trying to figure out, how am I going to run? Am I going to run as an independent? Am I going to run as a Democrat? How do I get more involved in politics? And in my exploration, I found that, if you can agree 51% with one party and 49% with another, then maybe you can decide where your political home is. I mean, I think a lot of people are without a political home right now, not just in North Dakota, but in the whole nation. So, and then what I do agree with and what I do focus on in my whole vocation is kind of quality of life issues for humans. And I think the Democrats' platform that they have right now speak to that in North Dakota. So what I also want to do is definitely separate North Dakota Democrats from national Democrat talking points, because some of those I don't agree with.
Democrats have been doing that. North Dakota Democrats have been trying to do that for a while, and
I know
it's tough because sometimes it's hard. I mean, listen, I follow a lot of North Dakota Democrats on social media, and I can tell you, in between their press releases and talking points, what they post on social media kind of makes it sound like they're not that far off from a lot of the national Democrats, understanding that there's a divide even nationally. I mean, I think there's a lot of ideological space between, say, Amy Klobuchar and Bernie Sanders. But still, I mean, there's a reason. I mean, Democrats have lost. You mentioned it. You lost the farmers. You lost a lot of blue collar workers. How do North Dakota Democrats gain them back? And I ask every election cycle, every Democratic candidate that I interview, I ask them that. How do North Dakota Democrats overcome that trust gap? Because I got to tell you, particularly in Western, we don't have a Democratic a lawmaker elected west of Bismarck. It just doesn't happen. In fact, many Western North Dakota legislative districts can't even find legislative candidates. It's terrible. How do you bridge that trust gap?
Just like you win any election, all through our history, you have to make the voters feel heard and respected, and change the conversation and lead the conversation. And I think, as not using a veterinary pun, as a dark horse candidate, maybe I'm that person. And maybe, I realize that I'm up against an incumbent Republican that has a lot of money, but maybe you just plant those seeds for the tree whose shade you're not going to be sitting under. So how do I measure my success? One, can we get the state talking, have a statewide discussion about small communities, vocational training, nutrient-dense food, animal agriculture, and can I start planting those seeds somewhere? And even if the Republicans take over my talking points, I will have won. That would be great. So you just have to have them feel heard and respected.
Let's
Go ahead.
Well, let's run.
But I agree with you 100%
Sure.
about we have no, and don't you agree? We need a two-party system. There's an imbalance of power when you just have one party.
Yeah.
So.
Well, I do agree with that. Let's run down some issues, because one of the things, and we went through this with Doug Burgum too, when people, typically somebody who runs for governor, historically anyway, they've held some other elected office before. And holding elected office, you have to make decisions, and that allows the public, there becomes a public record where the voters can go back and look and say, okay, when faced, they push the button this way instead of that way if they were a lawmaker, for instance. But we live in an era where that doesn't seem to matter that much to voters anymore. Doug Burgum had never held elected office before he was elected governor. Donald Trump had never, held elected office before he was elected president. So, and I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing. It's where we are. Personally, I like a track record, but hey, but let's run down some issues. Energy development, oil development in the past, the North Dakota Democratic Party's been, pretty critical of the way the Republicans have handled the oil industry. For instance, they don't like, the reform to the extraction tax that the legislature passed a couple of sessions ago. They don't like the way that the state has handled some of the spills. How are your feelings about energy development in North Dakota, specifically oil and gas?
So my dad was an oil and gas engineer, and so maybe I have a little bit more different bent on that. And also, I'm living here and growing my own small business during the oil boom. So I know what the oil industry, or energy, I should just say energy industry is
Sure.
to North Dakota. It did increase some of the things that we needed to have done here, like some of our roads and everything like that.
Sure.
So the reform to the tax law, I think, was it you? I read some article.
It's probably me. I write about it a lot. Yeah.
Yeah, so I think it would be wrong for the state to rely too heavily on one sort of tax.
Sure.
Right? Because everybody knows booms bust or, flatten out and change. And,
Ron,
Saudi Arabia just needs to open their spigots.
The legislature was just reviewing.
Yeah,
the legislature was just reviewing revenue numbers, and that was a point that Lynn Helms, director of the state's oil and gas division, and Ron Ness, who's the head of the North Dakota Petroleum Council, they're a private group representing the oil industry. Their point said they're talking about oil plateauing in the next 5 years. We'll have about maybe a decade of plateau, and then we're going to start to see revenues decline. North of what public officials tell me, I don't have official numbers, but definitely north of 50%, probably north of 60% of the tax revenues collected in North Dakota are directly or indirectly attributable to the oil and gas industry. That's too many eggs in one basket. Is how I feel. Right? Yeah,
I agree. And that's where a big part of my platform is diversifying our economy. We have incredible wealth here with the cattle, the plant ag. Why don't we have our own slaughter facility, for example? That's a huge industry that we can capitalize on.
When you say why don't we have our own? What are you talking about? Like a state-owned slaughter facility?
Either, that's an option. That's how, we've kind of weathered some bad storms with financial market changes on the national level because we had a state-owned bank. That came from, that's my understanding. Anyway, so it doesn't.
You can tell talking
advocating necessarily for a state.
You can tell talking about state-owned businesses.
Period.
Yeah, talking about state-owned businesses, you can tell gives me hives. But that's.
Yeah. But and maybe we can talk off air because I don't want to go all over the place.
Sure.
Or maybe you can have me back and I'll have some more homework before I talk about
Sure.
that. But my understanding is that gave our state a little bit more stability to weather some, national and international crises.
Yeah. We could probably have a debate about that, but we'll save that one for another day.
Let's save that one. But anyway, like a slaughter facility would be diversifying there. Why not animal ag and plant ag go hand in hand, and why not a pet food industry here?
Let's
huge.
Sure.
And one more thing I just wanted to something you pointed out I thought was a very important point. Our coal industries here. One reason why they are actually a little more profitable than other places is because we have the mines right next to the plants and we don't have those transportation costs. Consider if we could do that for our animal ag and our plant ag industry as well.
Yeah. I think you're right in concept. I balk at the idea of a state-owned business, but if we could get a private investment, boy, that would be great.
I'd be all for that. I'm okay.
Let's talk about coal, because like you said, our coal industry here in North Dakota has been more resilient, but we just heard recently Great River Energy saying they have some financial problems. That's a scary thing for a lot of people in central North Dakota. What are your feelings about coal and the future of the coal industry?
Yeah, so I'm not as familiar with coal as I am with the oil and gas part, but one thing I'm going to be going out there, and I mean, that's in Beulah, which is like a half-hour drive from me, And so is to go out and visit with them a little bit more about what they think about their industry and what's happening. So I'll have a probably hopefully more informed position. But one thing I think we don't kind of toot our own horns about, in my understanding, is we do carbon capture out there for our coal, and I think we're one of the only 2 places in the world. There are other places like South Africa that does that, and can we stay progressive like that? And as energies kind of come and go, can we stay progressive enough to keep, as we transition from different energies, can we keep up with that without like busting a whole generation of workers?
Yeah, I always say if coal goes the way of the buggy whip because we've just found better ways to produce energy, I'm for it. What concerns me is I feel like the government has put their fingers on the scale, and I realize this is a policy area maybe you haven't explored much, but coal is facing. At this point, coal is essentially expected when it gets really cold, like it has been the last couple of days as we record this, or at least the last 24 hours. Coal is expected to keep the lights on. I mean, they're expected to be baseload power, but wind energy gets a massive subsidy from the federal government in the form of the production tax credit, which, despite the wind industry insisting that they would let it, they were going to, they wanted it to expire last year. Congress ended up renewing anyway, at least on a somewhat limited basis. And also, wind power gets to sell their power first. When the wind turbines are spinning, they get to go to the front of the line, and coal has to sell their energy in what's left of the market. To me, that just seems like madness. Coal works. Coal's cheap. Coal's reliable. It'll be there to keep the lights on. It scares me a little bit that we're pushing ahead, and it seems like we're not doing it because of the marketplace, but because of politics. Do you agree with that, or what are your feelings?
Yeah, I would agree with that as far as I understand it. So I'm going to leave a little bit of room in case I become more informed and I understand kind of how that thumb on the scale actually works. But in general, I think if you want to be competitive, you can't, how do I say, you have to create your own market. So if people are convinced enough that wind is better, or geotherm, or whatever they decide to do, then you should develop better technologies to win that customer over, and not. This is where I don't like government too much meddling.
Yeah, because I think it creates. I think when government decides, when politicians get together and they decide, well, this is the best source of energy, they're not usually making that decision on a lot of that has to do with who lobbied them the most thoroughly, right? I mean, that bothers me. Anyway, let's run through some other issues, because I'm trying to give listeners an idea of who Shelley Lenz is, because the governor deals with a lot of issues. So social issues. Most people know me as a conservative person. I always tell my Democratic friends I'm probably more socially liberal than most of you are, because I'm a little bit of a libertarian. But social issues, abortion, gay marriage. Give us your philosophy on that front.
So I was talking actually to a conservative the other day, and he was asking me similar things. So I don't know if you remember, Rob, you might be too young, but I don't remember the science fiction novel Dune.
Yeah, Frank Herbert. You're talking. So, I blog for a living, so you're talking to a Class A nerd. You just asked a blogger if he knows what Dune is. Give me a break.
So one of my favorite quotes out of that is, "Man's flesh is his own. The water belongs to the tribe." So personal freedom with shared resources. So I am big on personal freedom. So I firmly believe, and I advocate for, that the government doesn't get involved anything past the skin, whether it's no matter what. So I am a veterinarian. Of course, I love vaccinations. That protects the herd. That's the best for social community and herd health and public health. This is an example. But I would never advocate, for example, government enforcing a vaccination because it passes the skin. And so I'm really into personal freedom, and I don't know if that kind of covers a lot of different social aspects, but man's flesh is his own and the water belongs to the tribe.
What about like, I mean, I'm just trying to explore that a little bit. What about like the tobacco cessation program? I mean, obviously the government takes they fight tobacco hard. Our state, along with numerous others, sued the tobacco industry. I mean, isn't that something where if I want to put tobacco in my body, isn't that my business?
Yes, it is, 100%. And, there's just, why do we have to try to legislate everything? There's some things that can't be legislated. And again, your own body. And the art of persuasion and public information campaigns, that's where I think the government should spend their money, not through legislation of anything past the skin. What you put in your mouth, right? So what they decide for school lunches, like they do the RDAs, the government's not always right about things. And so, no, I'm with you. What you could put in your body after you're 18 is what should go in your body.
How do you feel? Because you just talked about the government not enforcing a vaccination requirement, I suppose. I mean, we're that's something we've struggled with in North Dakota is vaccination rates have been falling. We do enforce it. We have, the schools are although we have a very liberal policy for exemption, where basically anybody who wants an exemption from vaccinations can get one. But do you believe in vaccinations? Do you think people should be vaccinated?
I believe 100% people and animals should be vaccinated.
Okay.
I believe 100% that is the ultimate in preventative health and herd health and to prevent, disasters. I just don't think the government should force you to vaccinate yourself.
All right.
They can do public information campaigns and encouragement and need to seek out, why people aren't getting vaccinated. Is it just because they don't have access, they don't understand, or do they have a belief system that prevents them from doing that?
Yeah.
So
let's I've already realized I've kept you longer than I said I would, but
no, I'm fine.
You're a delight to talk to. So I just want to taxes and regulation. Obviously, you just give us your philosophy in that area of public policy.
So it depends on, again, if you go back to man's flesh is his own, but the water belongs to the tribe. We have to protect those shared resources that affects everybody, and that comes through some regulation. So, I'll have to navigate through, what those regulations are and how it affects our businesses and what's the most effective way of doing it. Taxes, everybody knows you can't escape death or taxes, especially if you want to live in a human civilization. So how are our taxes spent? Are they being effective? Are they practical approaches? Are they local approaches? So I think they have to be individualized a little bit. I mean, that's a pretty broad, vague answer to a pretty broad, vague question. And maybe in a couple months when I understand a particular tax law that's up for grabs, then I can help give you my idea about what that be.
Well, I think we've done a pretty good job.
But property taxes, we got to stop with that. And they are just squeezing us dry out here.
When you say stop with it, like we have to address it or we have to abolish, because there was an effort to abolish property taxes at one point. I mean, what would you want to do about property taxes?
We can't keep squeezing us for it. So at least put a cap right now on it. And abolishing it, I'd have to see how that affects our local communities. So at least if we could just put a cap on it for a little bit and look for other sources for some of our solutions. For example, school infrastructure, for example.
It is frustrating, and I think there are some things the state can do. I mean, traditionally what the state has tried to do is we've tried to buy down property taxes, which a lot of local governments, certainly not all of them, but a lot of them just treat it as, we're just going to go in and backfill, the mills that the state bought down. I mean, it didn't really solve the problem. We just shifted a lot of the local, the burden for local spending from the locals to the state and didn't really get a lot of tax relief for it. And efforts to cap, you run into problems where the local governments say, well, local control, we have local control. And I don't know. I mean, I have been writing about politics in North Dakota for 16 years, and for every one of those years, people have been complaining about property taxes, and I just don't know what the solution is other than to say, if your local property taxes are too high, take it to your local government, because they're the ones, for the most part, who control the spending that drive those expenses.
Yeah, but what then I don't understand, Robin, maybe you can, since you've been following it longer, we have brought that to our local legislatures and senators, and they're all, we have all branches of government are Republican controlled, so it's not like they're like
but I'm talking about local governments. I mean, I'm talking about the county commission. I'm talking about the school district and the county commission and the city council and the park board. I mean, these are the local entities that, I mean, they're in control of the spending that drive the property taxes. The state, for the most part, other than I think a very small mill that I think goes to the state medical school, it's like a tiny fraction. The state doesn't get money from the property tax. It's not the state's tax. The state doesn't levy it. The state doesn't assess the properties. The state doesn't get any of the revenue.
Yeah, but what if there was a focus, at the state level to help alleviate some of our small communities' needs, not through property tax, but through prioritization of some of that infrastructure that the local place is trying to manage.
But where do you want those decisions being made? I mean, who should be making decisions about potholes in Dickinson? Should that be the Dickinson City Council or the state legislature?
Well, so the potholes are one thing, but the school infrastructure, that's the one that we feel the most for our daily lives.
Have you heard about this proposal?
I mean, aren't we sitting on like $7 billion or something?
Yeah, I mean, we have the Legacy Fund, we have the Common Schools Trust Fund, which has billions of dollars in it. That's actually revenue from the state's royalties on development on state-owned land and other forms of revenue. But let's what do you last question, just to flesh this final issue out. What do you think? There's been a proposal kicked around for basically using some of the state, like the Legacy Fund, to make basically low interest loans to ourselves. So essentially, like for instance, if the city of Dickinson wants to build a new school, there's a bonding issue, right? Where they got to secure a bond from a financial agency. What this proposal would say is, for schools or maybe sewage treatment plants or whatever, for these big projects, come to the state government. We can essentially loan the money to ourselves. We can eliminate a lot of the fees and the higher interest rates you're going to pay to a private bonder, from the private bond industry, because we're loaning the money to ourselves. We're essentially going to be paying the Legacy Fund, but we're not going to spend the Legacy Fund money because the expectation is that the locals still pay the money back. It's going to save a lot of money. The process is going to be faster, and we could build those infrastructure cheaper and quicker. What do you think of that proposal? Realizing that the only thing you have for it is my description. Right? I mean, you're working off my description of it. So I realize that.
I mean, I'll look into that more, Rob, and thanks for that question. And but that on the face sounds reasonable.
Yeah. Well, I think so too.
I mean, are you seeing some, like, as a conservative, are you seeing problems with something like that?
I don't know. I look at it as we have this money. I oppose creating the Legacy Fund, so maybe I'm not the right person to ask that question, but we have it. We may as well use it. And of all the ways I've heard there's a lot of stupid ideas for things to do with the Legacy Fund. That one to me seems not so stupid. We need sewage treatment plants anyway. We need schools. We need a lot of that infrastructure. I realize it's not the sexiest proposal out there, but if you could build those things quicker and cheaper, that seems like a real game changer for North Dakota.
Yeah. I'll look into that more, and I'll be more. I'll have a stronger opinion next time we talk. How about that?
Wonderful. Sounds good. Well, thanks for your time. Certainly appreciate it. And I know we'll be talking again as the election unfolds.
Okay. Thanks, Rob. I appreciate it. And thanks for putting that information out there.